Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
This week, minority leaders of both the Senate and the House outlined their respective caucus priorities for the 2022 session. Plus, highlights from lawmakers' calls to restore the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund and halt the use of no-knock warrants. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Members representing the minority party in the legislature do not set the agenda, may not have their bills heard, and cannot by themselves stop a bill from moving forward. But they do perform an essential role in lawmaking by highlighting their point of view and raising important questions about proposed legislation. Joining me to talk about the priorities of the Senate DFL caucus is Minority Leader Melisa López Franzen. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
As you know, the state is sitting on an enormous surplus of almost $8 billion, and an early effort has emerged with bipartisan support that would replenish the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, which was decimated due to the pandemic. If this doesn't happen, Minnesota businesses will see a tax increase. Is your caucus willing to support this as a standalone bill?
Well, Shannon, it's a very important issue, and as a small business owner myself, I understand it intimately, and I understand that large businesses and small businesses have a different impact when it comes to unemployment insurance. We just passed the bill out of the Finance Committee, which I sit on. It had the full DFL support in that committee. There's certainly some questions of whether this is the right priority to start the session with. We still have frontline workers that we have not fulfilled our promise from last session, so we think that that's a priority, and we'll see that play out on the floor. It's not that we don't want to support our small businesses, it's that we want to make sure that we also support workers who we already made a promise to that we were going to support their hero pay. That was at the tune of $250 million last session, so we need to do that first, and we certainly want to support our businesses, and you'll see a lot of Democrats supporting that too.
So more negotiations to come on that topic.
Absolutely.
Related to the surplus, the Senate Republicans would like to see tax cuts, including the removal of the tax on Social Security income. Your caucus is also in favor of tax relief, and in a press release, it, quote, responsible tax cuts for families, seniors, and small businesses. What kind of tax relief is your caucus interested in?
Well, our caucus actually voted on the record completely in support of reducing or eliminating the Social Security tax cut last session. We all voted for it. The Republicans voted against it. It was a biennium budget year where we actually could fund the 2-year cycle of our budget. They decided not to prioritize that, and now they want to do it in a policy bonding year where we can't afford to do permanent tax cuts because we won't know how the tails or the off years will go. I actually supported the bill. I was chief author of the bill as well. So there is a record that the DFL wants to eliminate that tax. It's a question of permanent tax cuts right now could not be sustained without having the full picture of our budget. There's certainly room for tax cuts. We talked about the working family tax credit, which is for working Minnesotans who are struggling the most with inflation costs, housing supports, property tax supports, and other supports like child care tax credits that we know that families are struggling with those high costs of child care and other day-to-day bread and butter issues like cost of fuel and cost of groceries. So we want to make sure that we hit those who are struggling the most first.
Okay. Finding ways to prevent crime and improve public safety is a huge topic this session. The Senate Republicans are proposing measures to improve police recruitment and retention. You have talked about preventing crime through proven investments, I'm quoting you, that involve mental health, programs for teens, and community policing. Is it an either or a both and?
And we can do both. And we've done some strides in proven intervention strategies for youth. We know, at least in my district, I represent Edina, we had 3 carjackings in a period of about a month. I've talked to my chief as late as today to understand what can we do to support them. We talk about retention and recruitment. That's important, but it's not going to solve the issue. Right now, the force of Edina Police is 57. They're only having 4 openings, some of them due to retirements, unlike Minneapolis, which has 190 openings. So we know that not every district has that struggle, but we want to support our law enforcement. My dad was a cop. My father-in-law was a cop as well. I understand the sacrifice and how we need to respect this profession and attract good folks to the profession. But we also need to see it comprehensively, right? Holistically, that we want to make sure that people have their mental health supports, their housing supports, their basic needs met. And a lot of what you're seeing in crime is due to that, and making sure that people go back and families have the supports to send their kids to school safely. Quite frankly, the pandemic has had a big impact on the anxiety in our communities, and we need healthy communities. So how do we do that? It's not just dumping money and changing sentencing. It's really looking at the whole person and the whole family, and that's what the Democrats are going to do.
Paid family and medical leave is a program that is already available to workers in large corporations and also people who work for state government. The DFL has pushed for many years to try to make this benefit available to all workers. It's part of your platform now. Why is now the time?
Well, I think people understand the time of leave, of having the ability to take care of their sick kids, whether they're quarantining or whether a family member is sick, old or young. And during this pandemic, everyone's felt that pain. And some people have the advantage of having those programs. Other people have had to quit jobs, have had to, and without unemployment, they've had to make tough decisions and have really struggled. So we want to make sure we have that safety net available, and it would work just as similar as unemployment insurance. We pay a payroll tax. The governor's talked about it's going to cost about a cup of coffee, I think, a week. So I think we need to talk about it. It is an important platform, and I think a safety net for moving forward and withholding any or withstanding any other pandemic in the future, God forbid. But we need to talk about it, and I think there's a way to do that, especially when we're talking about a huge surplus. It's a great opportunity for us to really set us up for success in the future.
Access to affordable childcare, or even access to childcare at all, has become enormously challenging across the state. It's a complex issue. It involves a labor shortage, it involves low wages, it involves structural barriers. What can the legislature do to help families get childcare?
Well, as you know, I have a 5- and a 6-year-old, so I've been through it really recently, and they're starting to go into the K-12 system. But childcare is extremely expensive, and Minnesota is one of the most expensive places in the country. It's the top 3, top 5. The other piece too, the workforce shortage because of the pandemic has really exacerbated. We need to professionalize the profession. I've had bills in the past, and our caucus supports tax credits for childcare workers, for the providers, and for the families that are paying those exorbitant costs. A lot of our paycheck goes to taking care of our kids, and we want to have the greatest supports and the greatest people in that industry, but we have to attract new workers. And I think the pandemic, if we focus on ending it by proven strategies to end the pandemic, but also supporting the worker shortage, and how do we attract good workers to help us with the achievement gap.
Yeah, which leads actually perfectly into my next question, because we're talking about a labor shortage, and it's in childcare, it's in nursing and long-term care, it's in policing in some parts of the state, it's in teaching. These are jobs that people do not to get rich, but to give back to their communities. So how can the legislature incentivize people to go into those lines of work?
Well, we have a role to play. We can't say we're going to fix it all with one bill, but we're going to try. And things that we can do, for instance, on the PCA programs and the personal care attendants that are taking care of our most vulnerable and our seniors, people with disabilities. The governor did an emergency CNA training, which stands for Certified Nurse Assistant. He activated the National Guard. That's a Band-Aid. We need to fix it permanently. How do we do that? By other programs like similar to that one in terms of training and retraining and reskilling, but also the pay. The pay in those jobs is below the minimum wage. It's actually not sustainable for people to have a living, and it's mostly immigrants and mothers, single moms are the workers in those areas. And we want to make sure people have good care, so we have to take care of those workers as well. So we need to change the rate, which is completely at the hands of the legislature, and support those workers by giving them the training and supports that they need. Again, when we talk about housing and other basic needs, we have to look at the whole person.
And finally, before we go, the one place where the minority vote does matter is the bonding bill. This is a bonding year. What projects are essential to the DFL?
Well, it's a historic point in time in Minnesota. We can call it the Minnesota moment because we have a historic surplus. We have a bonding bill that we can really leverage the infrastructure that we need to preserve state assets. Plus we have the Biden infrastructure bill coming in from the federal government. So I think we need to look and see what's the biggest bang for our buck, but certainly take advantage of this opportunity to make it as large as we can that's responsible for our taxpayers, but that puts Minnesota again on the great path to recovery.
Minority Leader Melisa López Franzen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A bill that would make Minnesota's Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund whole again will soon be debated by the Senate. Earlier this week, a bipartisan and bicameral group of lawmakers called a press conference to outline the importance of the measure.
Everybody's been hurt throughout the pandemic. I don't know that there's a sector of our society that you can't say has been affected. And one of the areas that's been most affected has been our small business community. Now, the unemployment system is there to protect working Minnesotans who are laid off. And Senate File 2677 will be allocating $2.73 billion to pay off a debt that we owe to the federal government. The interest that we owe on that debt, we're accruing about $50,000 in interest today. And then to reallocate and build back up that reserve to a point that it becomes self-sustainable.
I am hopeful we will start a trend. And the trend will be we'll address a critical issue, as Representative Pratt has said. This has to be paid back or our businesses get a tax increase. We have not recovered from the pandemic, but we're making huge strides. Secondly, I'd like to bring up that this bill should pass all by itself and not wait till the end of session, not be part of an omnibus bill. It should be a single bill on the floor of the House and Senate so that the members of the House and Senate, for once, can understand what we're voting on.
There's no better way to kill our job growth coming out of this recession than to have this tax go on our small businesses. That is going to keep them from hiring people back. They will not be able to afford it because it's based on their payroll. So this is for both the workers and for our small businesses especially.
Our businesses across the state, large and small, are still trying to recover from this pandemic. They are searching for workers, and they're still struggling with supply chain issues. This is not a time where they should have a significant tax increase in this first quarter, particularly a tax increase that is no fault of their own.
Our unemployment insurance tax went up 450%. I am not exaggerating. It went from $6,000 to $33,000. And it takes effect immediately, according to the letter we received. And it's in the middle of our budget year, so we couldn't have planned for this even if we had wanted to. So what does an increase of that nature look like for our school? Well, it means significant hits to otherwise valuable resources for our classrooms.
We already paid, for last year, we paid $109,000 to unemployment. The nature of our business, the fact that we dig dirt, we can't do that in the winter. So we are high utilizers of unemployment. We will be faced with an additional tax payable of $26,159.17 if I base that on last year's wages. That is an increase of 24%.
We continue our conversation on the priorities of the minority legislative caucuses with House Minority Leader Kurt Daudt. Thanks for being here.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
You joined a press conference the other day. It was a bipartisan press conference on the need to replenish the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. There are detractors who say that this bill would provide millions to those big box stores that did well during the pandemic. But if nothing is done, businesses all across the state will see a tax increase because of the deficit in this fund. What is your view on how quickly this needs to be done, and does it need to stand alone?
So I think it's one of the most important things that we have to do this session. You know, obviously none of these businesses asked for this, and none of them wanted to be in this situation where they had to lay people off, and not every business did. But the reality is, if we let current state statutes stand, there will be an automatic tax increase that happens to replenish this trust fund. Now, more than 35 other states have used federal dollars that we received to replenish that. I think less than 10 states still have money owed to the federal government for borrowing into that trust fund. So we really are behind the 8 ball in taking care of this, as so many other states have already done, and I think it's something that now everybody has said they support. The governor has been on the record saying that this should move quickly as a standalone bill. So now is when Minnesotans get to see if the governor's actions meet his words. So I'm hoping it can happen quickly.
One thing that may happen, though, is it may get tied in with that $250 million that was set aside for frontline workers. There was the working group over the summer that never came to a resolution. Should these be linked? Might they be linked? And could that $250 million be sweetened to be able to affect more people so that more workers will get a bonus?
So generally, I think things should not be linked. Sometimes in the first year of the biennium, we put other things into a budget bill, but in the second year of the biennium, it's generally more harmful to try to link things. There was agreement on $250 million for frontline worker pay. That was the amount that the majority parties agreed to last session. If we can stick to that $250 million, we should just get that out the door and then talk about whether or not more is appropriate, rather than hold up that $250 million and hold up that agreement to try to change the negotiations on it now. That could really hurt things, and it could hold other things up. So my recommendation would be, let's get the $250 million out the door. Let's get that agreed on quickly. That was already, the amount was already agreed on. Now let's just get the agreement on who it goes to, get it out quickly, and then move on and have a different conversation about whether more is appropriate.
Now, as so many panels, legislative panels, and caucus priorities and press conferences, rising crime is of concern to everyone. There are a number of proposals in the Republican-led Senate and in the DFL House to address the issue. There's increasing staff, funding, recruitment, penalties on one side. On the other, providing funding for communities, teen programming, mental health, getting at the root causes of crime. Where does your caucus stand on what should be done to tackle this crime issue? I think generally we believe we should be tough on crime, which means more police officers, and it means holding criminals accountable. I think we have an internal study that we have just completed where we analyzed every violent conviction in the state during the year of 2019. So it would be a felony level crime, but a violent crime. And we looked at the sentencing for those, and I think it was 46%. The judges did a downward departure from the minimum sentencing guidelines. So we're not holding criminals accountable. We're going to find a way to kind of get that information out in a way that we can share it with the public a little more readily. But when we talk about that with people, they're just shocked. When you think about the fact that Minneapolis is down maybe as much as 40% in their police officers right now, and we have violent crimes happening every day, almost becoming the norm. This is not a world that we should get used to. We need to put more officers on the street. I think what we need to do as a legislature is probably provide incentives for potential candidates to go into those educational pathways to get to become a licensed officer in the state of Minnesota. So if that means paying for their 2-year college or whatever it takes, we probably need to put those incentives in place. So more police officers and being more strict when people do commit crimes, we think will help. You've talked for many years about the importance of removing the tax on Social Security income. DFLers are quick to point out that not everyone pays the tax, only the higher income earners pay that tax on Social Security. But regardless, removing a tax on Social Security would have budget implications in future years. The state is sitting on a surplus right now, but can the state afford that sort of ongoing lack of revenue coming in?
Well, it's an interesting issue. Democrats are not being completely honest when they say that not everybody pays it. The reality is Social Security income is taxable income for everyone. Now, some people don't have enough income across the board, and they fall below a threshold where they end up not paying tax. But the reality is if they make more money anywhere else, that does become taxable income. And we're one of only 13 states that taxes Social Security income. I always say we can't rely on just our weather to keep our seniors here in Minnesota anymore. And we're literally paying people to go to tax-free states, state income tax-free states like Florida. And people are doing it. If we want to keep those people here so they can be here with their families, with their kids and their grandkids, and so that they can be taxpayers in our state, we need to be more competitive with these other states, because it's very easy to move to another warmer climate state and face time with your grandkids. So this is an area where we absolutely need to be competitive, and we can afford to do it long term.
And then speaking of the surplus, the nearly $8 billion as of the last forecast, what would your caucus like to see done with that money?
Well, I think generally we would like to see, when you have a surplus of that size, and this is a generational, probably a largest surplus in modern history, if not completely in history, we'd like to see generational tax reform, stuff that like the Social Security tax. What it means is we're collecting too much money from taxpayers, more than we need to operate state government. So we need to adjust the collections so they match the expenditures. The Democrats' only answer is, well, we've got more money coming in. We need to make the expenditures match the revenue. And what that is, it doesn't allow us or doesn't make us do our job of making sure that we're using the tax dollars that we collect from Minnesotans effectively and efficiently to provide the services that they want and need, and not provide more than people need. And that's certainly the tough thing that legislators have to do. But we believe that money should be returned to the taxpayers in permanent long-term tax relief.
Whether it's because of the pandemic or the retirements of the baby boomers or any number of other factors, the state is facing a shortage of labor in long-term care, in healthcare, teaching, police, as we've already spoken of, the hospitality industry. What could the legislature do to help with the workforce shortage?
I think this is one of those things that we actually can make a difference, but we need to put in place policies that incentivize people to get into the workforce. And if you think about the policies that we've had during COVID and our response to COVID, it was basically incentivizing people not to work. Big bonuses for unemployment, paying people as much as $600 a week on top of their normal unemployment to stay home. Well, people got comfortable with that, and we're finding out that people aren't re-entering the workforce. So we may need to do some things to disincentivize people to stay home and actually incentivize them to get back into the workforce. And we should put every policy that we look at through that litmus test question. What is it that we're incentivizing by putting this program in place? And we need to incentivize people to get back into the workforce.
Now, as you've joked about I've heard you, it's funny actually. The one place where you really have a say is about whether there is a bonding bill and what's in the bonding bill and the size of the bonding bill, with the surplus, with federal infrastructure dollars, with low interest rates. What are your thoughts on a bonding bill?
Well, I've been in the majority. Actually, I was in the majority first, but in leadership in the majority, and then now the minority again. We've been very open and honest this time about the fact that we do need a bonding bill. We believe it should be a reasonably sized bonding bill that invests in kind of either regionally important or statewide important infrastructure projects, transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure, whether it be wastewater or drinking water, our HEAPR, that's kind of our acronym here for state-owned assets, and making sure that we're taking care of the buildings that we own, whether it be at the universities or state-owned buildings, doing the general maintenance and upkeep of those buildings. I could see something in that $1.4 billion range of GO bonding. That's kind of what we did 2 years ago, and I think something that people would be comfortable with. You can actually bond more than you need, and there's a limit to what we can actually spend in a 2-year period. And the reality is, if we can't actually get those projects started and shovels in the ground before 2 years from now, we shouldn't be bonding for it now. Let's look at it 2 years from now. And so we think that it's important to have a good bonding bill of important infrastructure projects. As far as the transportation and that federal money, we very strongly support taking the remainder of the auto parts sales tax and dedicating that completely to roads and bridges, which we did. We started that back when I was the Speaker of the House some years ago. So we want to finish that job. And that should more than provide the matching dollars needed to take full advantage of all those federal dollars we'll have coming in now for transportation in Minnesota.
Minority Leader Kurt Daudt, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
The shooting death of Amir Locke last week in Minneapolis after police executed a no-knock warrant prompted a press conference by House DFLers to call for a ban on the use of no-knock warrants under most circumstances.
And I'm here today after spending time in my community processing yet another loss at the hands of the police. We are here to hopefully end no-knock warrants as the Minneapolis Police Department uses them. No-knock warrants are a tool in a toolbox, but it's a tool that should only be used in the tiniest sliver of cases: kidnapping, hostage situations, and human trafficking. The St. Paul Police Department hasn't used a no-knock warrant since 2016. The FBI no longer uses no-knock warrants. When I've spoken to law enforcement in greater Minnesota, I'm told that no-knock warrants are used exceedingly rarely. So why do we remain so tied to this practice that is known to harm citizens as well as peace officers?
It's been less than 2 years since George Floyd was murdered and less than a year since Dante Wright was killed. Yet again, here we are to remind our own government that Black lives matter and that our Constitution matters.
Representative Holland's bill to ban no-knock warrants is necessary at this time because its purpose is meant to keep people safe. It's meant to ensure that the people who are meant to keep us safe also do their work to the utmost standards.
And we feel as a family that it's systems that need to be kind of held accountable for these types of botched, I don't want to call them invasions, but really a militarization, a militarized approach to policing.
We need to have the highest standards for police work that we can have in Minnesota. We need to have high standards for oversight and accountability, because if we cannot rely on law enforcement to fairly enforce the laws, to look for dangerous practices and try to find a way to stop it, if we cannot find a way for law enforcement to truly serve the community, then none of us are going to be truly safe.
For the past couple of years, House DFLers, really led by the Posse Caucus and the members who are here today, have been focused on addressing change in how we do policing in Minnesota so that there's greater accountability. And no-knock warrants is one of those things that we have worked to reform with the hope that we could prevent a tragedy like this from happening. And although we were successful at passing some restrictions in last year's budget, it is clear that those were insufficient and that we have more work to do. A critical component of true public safety is ensuring that we have a policing system that doesn't put members of the public in harm's way unnecessarily, that doesn't put peace officers in harm's way unnecessarily, and doesn't put both community and officers in a system that's not working and puts all of us at risk. We have to have greater accountability and transparency in order to have community trust in law enforcement. And law enforcement cannot do their job if there's not a relationship of trust there.
Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.